today I'd like to talk to you about 365 Days by Ronald J Glasser, MD, Major, United States Army Medical Corps. Now, even when you look at the cover of the book, I think there's something kind of telling about the author's name there. He writes as his title MD, Medical Doctor, then Major underneath that. I don't know if that's the case with all medical doctors in the U.S. military, but it is the case here, and I think it's quite telling because his perspective seems to be a bit more of a medical perspective first. This book has a huge medical bent to it, but it's not about telling you his own experience and what it means to be medical in the Army necessarily, because there is a huge medical bent to this book, of course, but it's a collection of different stories and themes throughout the Vietnam War. This book is 17 chapters total, and you can read any of these chapters individually. There's not too much of a continuity between them. Yes, the second one clearly came from the first one, and we do see a bit of that in the book. But you can read any of these stories, any of these chapters in isolation, and you can still appreciate it for what it is. Now, the author states he wrote this book because he felt that it needed to be written, not so much that he just wanted to write it. I do think that other authors have had that feeling about writing as well, which I do think gives the book quite a bit of objectivity, because he's not so much writing the book to say, I felt this way, this should have been like this should have been like that. There's a kind of objectivity because of that. Now, I did record this video originally months ago, but I'm re-recording now because I'm trying to learn how to make these videos between 7 to 15 minutes long. So as I keep trying to cut this down, I keep trying to focus on fewer chapters. So I'm going to show you chapters 1, Go Home Kurt, chapter 10, Gentlemen, It Works, and chapter 13, Coppers. Now, I chose chapter 1 because, of course, it's the first chapter, so it should have a certain way of introducing you to sort of themes and whatnot in the book, even though you can read any of these in any order. But it does sort of have, stylistically in an organizational sense, it does have that. And it tells you about what it is to do medical in the Army, and then it focuses on one enlisted man who gets injured named Kurt, and we see a bit of that. Then chapter 10 is Gentlemen, It Works, and it focuses on a psychiatric perspective, so that chapter is also all medical. But then as we look at the chapter Choppers about helicopters, it gives you sort of a history about helicopters. It tells you about helicopters in Vietnam, which helicopters they use, the price of them. And it has very little medical bent to it. Of course, it's there because the first chapter tells us the importance of helicopters in the Vietnam War. But then the 13th chapter doesn't really mention anything medical. So we see that we see this throughout the book a little bit. Something really medical, some medical, and then something like chapter 13 where nothing is about medical care. So when I was preparing for this months ago, I also watched a short documentary to help me prepare for this. And that documentary I wish they would have remastered it, It was just on a bunch of documentaries about the Vietnam War in general, not just medical. And I wish they would have remastered it. It was recorded, they never updated the video quality or anything from when it was first recorded. But it's just quite amazing what they did at this time to take care of people who were injured at that time. It showed some of the flight nurses and all the care that they took to put soldiers onto a plane and to evacuate them either to Japan or to the U.S. And it's just amazing everything they do. I was in the Navy for 4 years, and anytime we got sick, it was just take water, take ibuprofen, and you're okay. And that's it. So here we are, the cover of 365 Days. So as I just mentioned, if you take a small note of that, Ronald J Glasser, MD. I don't know if this is common with all doctors in the U.S. military, or if the author chose to put his title as medical doctor first before major, which I think is a little bit notable in the book. Go Home Kurt. So here on this page, they describe to you what the probability of survival is for somebody who gets injured in Vietnam. And he's not so much boasting, but it is quite incredible what they were able to do at the time. To boast that at any given time, somebody's 10 minutes away from a hospital. So he says you have a pretty good chance of getting the medical care that you need. Pretty cool stuff. How they can do all this. So this is what we see a little bit, especially the first and second chapter. And this confuses me a tiny bit because he's describing the expectations of what they have on an enlisted person who's drafted into Vietnam. The expectation for them is 10 months and 5 days, a full deployment. Now, what confuses me a tiny bit about this is the title of the book is 365 days. And a few parts of the book, it says that they expect 1 full year from them. So I hope that somebody can explain to me the kind of the nuance here. I mean, maybe it just got lost to me. I'm not sure. But yeah. Okay. So what the book is explaining here on this page, and it follows on to the next one, is that there's a bit of a disagreement within some of the doctors in the Army. And I think, not sure, but I think that doctors, they too were drafted in the Army. So some doctors are very patient-centric to the point that it can actually hurt the Army. What I mean by this is that, if somebody's injured, well, the doctor's going to find some sort of way of claiming another injury, exaggerating the injury, holding the patient long enough to make them, because while they're getting medical attention, that takes away from the time of their deployment. So if they're required a 10-month, 5-day deployment, and you got sent to medical care, got sent to the hospital 6 months in, you're there for I don't know, 3 months, or they're going to do what they can. Some doctors will do what they can, drag that time out longer. But then other doctors, the way they see it is that for the Army Medical Corps, their job first and foremost is not just to make happy patients and happy civilians and this type of thing. Their job first and foremost is to support the Army. So what it mentions here is that some units are at 70% capacity, and for this individual, Kurt, he has a valuable MOS, so they especially need him. And Peterson disagrees with that. Peterson is a major, and the colonel above him, they have a little bit of a disagreement. I don't know what these disagreements would look like. I was enlisted, so I wouldn't always know what they look like between officers, but especially between medical officers, because you can imagine it's a little bit different than just another line officer, right? Because because if you're a doctor, I suppose you're a doctor first, right? I've always wondered about that. Like, what is that like to be in the military and you have like a nurse who outranks a doctor? I've always wondered about that too. That's nothing to do with this though. Oh, so with Kurt though, he was getting tired of school a little bit. So he takes his chances, wanted to get out of school. He was getting tired of that. He even says he wanted to be free for a while. But trying to be free, he becomes less free because he gets drafted. But he doesn't, he still has quite a deal of respect for the Army. He wants to complete his tour honorably. And so there's a little bit of an argument between Peterson and Kurt. Peterson wants to delay Kurt going back as much as he can. And Kurt says, I have to. So where the chapter ends, Kurt is probably sent back because the colonel wants him sent back as well. But Peterson, doesn't want him back. Well, I'm going to show you the next chapter, chapter 10, in a second. Okay, now we're going to look at chapter 10, Gentlemen, It Works. So this chapter is really about psychiatric care in the Army during the Vietnam War. So first, it deals with psychiatric care when it comes to something traumatic happening, and how do you deal with that? The mind, the brain. And first and foremost about that, but the psychiatrist who it focuses on, he also gives us a bit of perspective about racism a little bit as well. And the stylistically, this chapter is very interesting. That the sort of the history and the current approach is all in italics. But then this chapter begins to transition a bit more to a black corpsman and sort of the way he lashed out, but the way this psychiatrist says that it's due to some of the racist treatment that he may have gotten. Well, so it says here, you know, you don't want to make a disability lifelong. Some can be losing legs, eyes, arms, something like this. That is lifelong. But how do they sort of make the rest of it not be lifelong? On to this next one. So we see an example. A person says, I cannot move. This person says, I cannot move. And you look in the chapter, and as you read this chapter, he says he cannot move, but there's no physical injury preventing him from moving. So how do they encourage this person to begin to move? So you see here, this language of sickness. What does this mean, the language of sickness? So a person is hurt. And how do you focus on the person, but not necessarily that injury? Especially maybe a mental injury or maybe another type of injury. You don't want to only call attention to that, and that becomes their whole identity. You want to still focus on the individual and what they're able to do. Because it says here, because once that label is attached, so if you tell somebody you have shell shock, and you just keep repeating this, a person says, I have shell shock, that's who I am. I'm a shell shocked individual. So, and then it says on this one that, I guess in a way to juxtapose this with the first chapter, one army doctor might be keeping patients from going back into Vietnam, but as it says here, some of these people, they want to be a hero. And that gives them a type of trauma as well. Maybe for some of these individuals, they might be thinking about their unit back there in Vietnam. And at this time, during the Vietnam War, if a person goes to receive medical care, they're still assigned to a unit. They're not like unitless. So, you know, okay, so it gives us about a bit of this with the First World War, and they really focused on the symptoms, as I had just mentioned a little bit. So when I went back a little bit, we're going back to this part, but I can't move, he said desperately. And this stylistically shows Ronald J Glasser's talent as a writer, the way he's able to transition back and forth, and it works pretty seamlessly whenever you tell. Good, just let him crawl there. So he knows the individual can walk, but the individual feels in his mind that he cannot. So how does he encourage him to walk? At one point, they put the food by the door of his room, and if he wants to get the food, he's gonna have to get it himself, and he's gonna have to figure what's he gonna do. Is he not gonna get it? He's gonna go on the floor and just lay there. He's gonna crawl to it, or is he gonna just try to get up and get his food? So we see here, you've never been to the ghetto. We see this story here where somebody says he knew somebody who, a black man in the ghetto, and he renovates his apartment really nice. What does the landlord do? The landlord raises the rent on the apartment so that way the person who's trying to make it look nice can no longer afford to live there and he has to move out. So some people might have different approaches to try to make their standard of living better, make their own life better. And in this example, it works against the tenant. So it says here, you were a healer, a savior, a medic. You could put everything aside for a while, and then when it was over, and you were back to being black again. So So there's this person who lashes out, and he lashes out because he's feeling that he's being treated in a racist way. And for a while, everybody kind of has this equality within rank, right? That if the system works well, the army system, the military system, I mean, we are treated a certain way, maybe based on MOS, based on your rate, based on this type of thing. But then it's not based on your race. You know, you're all equal in race, and even later on, you're even equal on race and sex. But this individual is not being treated quite as well. So once again, it works, this approach to medical care. But then it also says here, it seems to work, but I think this commentary is Ronald J Glasser's commentary, that they don't go and just try to check later on. It just works. We know it works. Yeah, it seems to work to get them out of the hospital. What about later on? All right, and finish with this one with chapter 10. So this is the last chapter I'm going to show today, chapter 13, Choppers. By the time you read this, over 4,000 helicopters will have been shot down. As you read this, stylistically, he was writing this at that time with that still fresh in his mind. But it gets lost on us a little bit that, I bought this book off a Humble Bundle a while back. And if there was a more recent version of this book that could have been updated to some of the language like this, it may have been available. So whenever you read this, you're reading something a little bit frozen in time as well that hasn't had some of the language updated for us also. Okay, so it says above all else, it was a helicopter war on the bottom. So here he mentions some of the different companies that made these different helicopters and whatnot, through the names, we get the history, and how much money they cost. But despite their cost, it says a single AK round is effective up to 1,200 feet. So what he's telling us is that these helicopters, they cost so much, so important, it's a helicopter war. But it doesn't take something so expensive back to destroy it. So he mentions within this, and he's going back to the history of it, but this even applies to, modern times, Vietnam War times, that it reads like if you got a helicopter here, and you have this, you got the rotor on top, you got the rotor on the back spinning. That's very important because otherwise the helicopter can just spin like this. At least that's how I'm reading and how I'm interpreting it. Maybe somebody can sort of correct me. And so you need this rotor on the back to keep the helicopter itself from spinning. But if you shoot that in the back, such an expensive piece of equipment is not as useful anymore. So it says it's a very complex machine, goes on about this. So here it says that one pilot had experienced before. Sorry, I need to enlarge some of these pictures. That his gunship had trouble flying. So I don't know if any of you have ever been a pilot before. You've been in a helicopter. I don't know what. But just imagine if you had a small car and you are moving, and then you attach to your small car a small trailer, and even the car on the inside is filled with stuff. Well, you're going to feel a difference in how your car is moving. In this situation, they just filled it up with stuff and had trouble flying. Okay, so finished here on this part. I hope you've enjoyed this review. I hope that I'm going to be a bit more concise with some of the stuff, and I hope that you've enjoyed watching. And yeah, maybe you will enjoy this book too. Okay, later. Bye.